Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's public engagement session. Just a note that we will be waiting about another minute or two, and then we'll get started with the presentation and Q&A session. Thanks. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us for the City of Kingston's online engagement for the Central Kingston Growth Strategy. My name is Mark Nardi. I'm a communications officer with the City of Kingston, and I will be your facilitator for this session. So just a few notes as we get started with things. This session is live streamed to YouTube and is being recorded. As you joined, you may have heard a voice and seen a notice box pop up on the Zoom platform indicating that it is being recorded and live streamed. So you would be required to accept that notification in order to proceed into this meeting. So for your privacy, all participants have had their video turned off and have been muted. The chat functionality has been temporarily disabled as well for Zoom. Sometimes technology troubles happen, and there are a list of common challenges on Get Involved Kingston, including if your audio or video isn't working. You can also adjust your view options so that you can see both the presentation and the members of the project team at the same time. If your internet connection goes down at any point in time, you can call into the meeting using the number that is on the screen here. Please note that there are two separate webinar IDs depending on which session you are attending. As it's the 2 p.m. webinar, you will be using the top ID there, ending with 0481. We will do our best to help you with your technical problems, but sometimes the easiest way to resolve an issue is simply just to log out of Zoom and join back in using your unique invitation that you would have received in your email. You can also follow us along on YouTube using the City of Kingston YouTube channel. The live stream will appear there. After this presentation, the live stream will immediately convert over to a recording as well for you to refer back to at any point in time. If you have a question at any point during this session, please use the Q&A feature, and it's available at the bottom here on the taskbar. You can see it there. You can also raise your hand verbally. So if you click the raise hand button, a prompt will appear by your name on the attendees bar, at which point I will then go ahead and unmute you. You can go ahead with your question and staff will be able to respond. Please note that we're going to limit it to one question per individual. Follow-ups will then be treated as a separate question where you will then again raise your hand. The reason we're doing this is because of the number of attendees. We want to make sure that everyone has had a chance to ask their questions that they brought this. We will have this session running for exactly 1 hour. At the end of that 1 hour, if we do have any unanswered questions, we're going to encourage you to reach out to staff directly and we can follow up to make sure that your questions are addressed. The guidelines for participation are now on the screen. We'd like to ask all attendees at any point if there's anything that they would like to have added to the guidelines for this engagement session. If you do have anything you'd like to add, we ask you to raise your hands. Otherwise, seeing no objections to the guideline participation, we will proceed with this online engagement session following the guidelines for participation as outlined here. Here's the agenda for today's presentation. As you can see, we will be beginning a few minutes late today, but that's okay. We're going to pass things over shortly to the project team, at which point they will run through a quick presentation that gives you a little bit of background on the project to date. At 2:30 roughly, we will be opening things up to a Q&A for all attendees. And at 3 p.m., we will be concluding the session. At this point, I'm going to now pass things over to Sukriti, who will start the presentation.
Thanks, Mark, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Q&A session about the Central Kingston Growth Strategy. My name is Sukriti Agarwal, and I am the Manager of Policy Planning with the City of Kingston Planning Services. The recommendations for the official plan and the new zoning bylaw prepared by the project consultants, WSP Canada Group, were presented at a public meeting before the Planning Committee on August 12th. Staff are continuing to seek feedback on these recommendations and may propose further refinements to the official plan policies and the proposed zoning regulations for the Central Kingston area. At this time, the zoning recommendations have been integrated into the second draft of the new zoning bylaw, which is available on the city's website. So with that, I'm happy to introduce Mike Salagi, Senior Planner, who will be taking us through the project background and a high-level summary of the recommendations.
Thank you, Sukriti. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who I haven't met, my name is Mike Slaggy. As Sukriti mentioned, we did a full presentation to Planning Committee back in August. So we trust that you've had an opportunity to review either the YouTube recording of that meeting or looked at the report that was submitted and posted on the city's website in support of that meeting. So this presentation will be very brief and just really highlight more of a refresher of the key highlights that came from that presentation. So next slide, please. So here, just an overview of the study area, the 16 central neighborhoods that were undertaken as part of the scope of this project. The study area for the CKGS project is that identified in yellow. And the areas outside of that, in either in white or in another color, are areas that are either under their own existing or future policy frameworks. Next slide, please. So the intent and goals of the CKGS project were first to identify strategic areas within that yellow area, within the study area, where the highest form of intensification could be accommodated to ultimately absorb 4,000 units within the study area. And in support of that, the consultants produced a policy and zoning framework establishing those intensification zones. Next, within the areas outside of the intensification zones, it was not the intent to necessarily stop development in those areas, but to better guide development so that they can more appropriately coexist with the existing development and ultimately fill out the vision for those areas. And so a policy and zoning framework was developed in order to guide that development as well. And with that, also the preparation of design guidelines for those two areas, as well as an assessment of the available infrastructure and services within the study area. Next slide, please. So here is an overview of the basically three main intensification areas. One of the area in the southwest has kind of two sub areas, but we'll get into that in a little bit. And those are the areas identified in that reddish orange on the screen. These areas were selected based on a variety of criteria, which includes access to major corridors at the edges of neighborhoods, existing multi-unit and higher density development, access to transit and active transportation networks, the existence of various amenities, services and institutions, retail, schools, etc. The available infrastructure within those areas, as well as then refined through community feedback, which we received throughout the lifetime of the project. Next slide, please. So this is just a zoom in of the first area in the eastern portion of the study area. That's along Johnson and Brock corridor. Next slide, please. Just very quickly showing the envisioned built form for the area. Again, this is just a massive model, but ultimately looking at a 6-story development or 20 meters, whichever is lesser, with a setback of 2 meters from Johnson or Brock Street and 3 meters from the exteriors, to better match the existing residential character of those side streets, a step back of 2 meters above the 4th story, and there would be a 10-meter setback from the rear with and including a 2-meter landscape buffer. The intent is really to allow for residential development, but along Johnson and Brock corridors, we also have included the opportunity, if it's desired, to include some retail uses at grade. It's not a requirement, but we wanted to provide some flexibility for that area. Next slide, please. Next slide. Moving to the southwest, This is west along Johnson Street at Johnson and Portsmouth, as well as a little bit further south on Portsmouth, across from St. Lawrence College. Next slide, please. Here along Johnson Street, you see a built form of about 4 stories or 12 meters, really envisioning more of a walk-up apartment or stacked townhouse type of development, again with the 10-meter setback from the rear yard with that 2-meter landscape buffer. Next slide, please. A similar form of development south along Portsmouth at Churchill here, which again at 4 stories or 12 meters and walk-up apartments and townhouses. Next slide, please. One area that was slightly different was moving a little bit further north along Portsmouth, around the Calderwood Drive area, because of the unique lotting pattern where we have this a lot of through lots. We didn't model it out, but the envisioned form for this area is again 4 stories or 12 meters, but really a kind of a back-to-back townhouse development or townhouses that front onto Woodstone and Portsmouth with more of a central parking area. In either way, we just wanted to have development that addressed both Woodstone and Portsmouth avenues. Next slide, please. And next slide, looking to the last, next slide, please. The last intensification zone further north along Bath Road and Sir John and Macdonald. This was the area that was slated for the most intensive intensification, if I can say that. And that was largely due to the fact that there was a pre-existing zoning which allowed for high density development in the area and other similar built form. Next slide, please. So for this area along Bath and Sir John and Macdonald, envisioned more of a high rise 12-story developments up to 38 meters with a 6-story base. And again, step backs for that higher 6-story portion, with step backs to, again, create more of the pedestrian environment along the roadway. And then taking some cues from the work that was done in Williamsville, the floor plate is limited to 790 square meters and also includes some tower separation. And then you can see along Wright Crescent, you can go to the next slide, please. More similar to what we saw on Johnson and Brock Street, a 6-story development with the step backs above the 4th story, again, to help transition to the existing lower density developments along Wright Crescent. Next slide, please. In terms of the zoning recommendations within the low density areas, the recommendations included the removal of the floor space indices and lot coverage. That was largely due to the fact that across the various neighborhoods, there was a real variety or variability within the lot sizes. And often we found that the FSI or lot coverage was either inappropriate or sometimes counterproductive. So we've removed those and using setbacks and other provisions to try to control the built form a little bit better, including now having this maximum building depth, which is a maximum of 18 meters measured from the minimum front yard setback, which is often established as 4.5 meters, and then including some flexibility to vary depending on the existing context. Also, we've added the number of stories to the height, not just meters, so that we better establish the intent of the zoning, as well as an inclusion of minimum lot frontages. Next slide, please. For the existing medium and high density area changes, within the B zone, again, we have included a minimum lot frontage, as well as the maximum building depth, which is again 18 meters as measured from the minimum front yard setback, and allowing for that variability within the setbacks to respond to some of the changes that you see across these various communities. Within the B1 zone, we have removed the density requirements and established minimum lot area requirements. And across the medium and high density areas, we've removed the minimum unit sizes, which those are already more appropriately addressed in the building code. Next slide, please. Finally, as moving forward, we will continue to receive feedback on the recommendations from the specific CKGS documents until November 5th. Any of those comments we'll assess and then bring into our future planning processes. As Sukriti mentioned, the zoning recommendations have already been adopted into the new draft of the zoning bylaw, which was released back at the beginning of August and are available on the city's website. So there's continued opportunity for comment through that process as well. And we will be bringing forward shortly an official plan amendment to add a new section 10G to provide the policy guidance to allow for those intensification areas that I discussed earlier, and with intent of having a public meeting for that process the first or second week of December. And so there will be plenty of opportunity for more comment on this process as well. As I mentioned, the full presentation was made to Planning Committee on August 12th and is available on the city's website. If you have any issues finding the link to that presentation, or if you have any further comments or questions after this meeting, you can reach out to myself at the email there, msalagi@cityofkingston.ca, or security@sagarwal@cityofkingston.ca. Thank you, and I'll pass it back to Mark.
All right, thank you very much. So now we're entering the Q&A portion of the session. So just a few reminders. If you're looking to ask questions, we have two ways that this can be done. One is using the Q&A button or feature that's just in your taskbar at the bottom. You can type in questions and staff will be able to respond to them. Alternatively, you can raise your hand, at which point we will acknowledge you. You will be invited to unmute yourself and share your question. Just a few notes, obviously, any questions typed into the Q&A will be visible to all attendees, and similarly, any obviously comments when you're unmuted will be for all attendees as well at the session. So just bear that in mind as well. All right, so moving straight into this, we have raised hand from AJ Keelty. So you've been invited to unmute, go ahead.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the opportunity to ask a question, specifically around the area of Brock and Johnson Street, study area 1, I believe it is. It appears that there is at that corner an 8-story building and a 12-story building. Yet the policy planning area is not going to expand into the block that carries the 12-story building. I'm asking if you expand that area to make sure that we can properly upzone the areas that have the greatest potential for putting compatible buildings and for meeting demand where it's needed, as opposed to stopping it at Division Street.
Hi, AJ, and thank you for that question. Previously, through this study, we had identified a larger area for intensification around Brock and Johnson. However, as we progress through this work, we will be further reviewing the remainder of that area that was previously identified for intensification as part of likely the official plan update. The reason being that we do want to complete a market feasibility study to determine what form of development would be most appropriate in that area. And then there are also servicing constraints. So a lot of that area has combined storm and sewers. So that was another reason why we have at this point only proposed intensification along the Brock and Johnson Street corridors. But like I mentioned, we will be looking at the broader area in the coming years.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. The servicing obviously can be dealt with at a future time. The zoning is going to last for a long time. So just suggest you get it done now. In terms of market feasibility, I'm glad to hear you talk about that. The 6-story corridor on that Brock and Johnson, originally I thought would be an area that might be phenomenal to upzone and to make things happen. With these 6 stories that you're proposing, which is lower than the existing 12 and 8 in the neighborhood, I don't believe the current land cost is going to pencil a single deal you can do to get to 6 stories here. So just be aware of that. If you're looking to actually create housing, we would not underwrite a development deal to anything less than a 15% IRR, especially the time frame it takes. So underwriting to an 8%, 8.5%, I think was in your report, is long ways from actually being a reality. So in order to get that housing and that stuff going, you're going to need a lot more height and density to pull it off. Just from our perspective, it's a big piece. So do be aware of that if you're looking to actually upzone, and hopefully we can find a way to make some more housing happen in our community.
Thanks, AJ.
We do have an additional question from Patricia in the chat here. So I'm glad to see that retail is being permitted for development on Johnson in the area near Queens. Why make this optional and not required?
Thanks, Patricia. I'll just answer that. We didn't make it a requirement because of some of the experience we had with Williamsville. A lot of the feedback came back as saying that oftentimes developers had issues filling out that retail space. And sometimes it became an extra burden for their developments, and they would sit empty because it just wasn't it wasn't viable for their project. So we want to encourage it and have the option there, but we don't want to force it upon them in case that isn't something that they can do. We would rather have the residential units filled in than empty storefronts if we can avoid it. So that was the reasoning behind it, to allow for it to happen, but not necessarily make it a requirement.
See another hand. Just a note as we head into the session as well, please make sure that you're putting your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat box. The reason being, we just want to make sure that the project team sees all of your questions. It will be included in reporting, and we just don't want any questions from residents to go unmissed. Seeing another question from AJ, you can go ahead.
Thanks very much. I just want to get a sense of how recent your land cost study is for that Brock and Johnson Street corridor.
So we haven't done a study specifically for the Brock and Johnson Street corridors. However, we took the lessons learned from the Williamsville work that was completed in 2020, so completed last year, which was looking at a similar build form for that area, like a 6-story height with a 4-story street wall.
Got it. So currently right now, bedrooms in that area of houses on those blocks are trading for upwards of $150,000 per bedroom. Typically you'll see 6 to 10 in a particular home. So it's really, really important if you're going to try to incentivize the creation of housing that you just really understand the land costs, because that is the raw material that these things are built on. And if the land costs are too high relative to the permissions that you're allowing, the effect will be no housing built. Just want to make sure that we are using the most recent data when we're deciding how big these buildings are going to be, and more than just planning rationale, but like you got to have the most recent land cost.
Okay, and we're seeing another question from Bruce. Bruce, you can go ahead.
Yes, hello. My name is Bruce Bursey. I live on Mulcaster Street in Calvin Park. I'm also the president of the Portsmouth District Community Association, and I have I guess a general question. We see this as this work as important to increase the density in the central district, the central area of Kingston, and within the Portsmouth district. This is one set of changes that we see happening on the horizon, where there will be potentially thousands of new people moving into the district. If you look at what's happening at the Prison for Women property, potentially happening at the Kingston Penitentiary, potentially what would be happening on the provincial campus, and as well at Elevator Bay, all of these are on the same planning horizon, so to speak, that we are looking forward to. In many ways, one thing that it will do, we hope, is provide an increased economic base for expanding access to commercial and retail services in our district. It also, though, brings with it some, and I forgot to also mention that Queen's and St. Lawrence College do have plans for development as well in the near future. So all of these, the thought of, just perhaps I back up, if you look at the district, if you look at the area, this is a very car-centric part of the city. There really isn't very much available for day-to-day living where you can walk or take a bicycle. if you want food or more for your day-to-day life, you generally have to go up on Sir John A up to the Kingston Center or further up on Princess Street. This probably will be changing, and it will provide a greater opportunity to justify having grocery stores and more in this area. In the meantime, though, what we expect to see would be increased cars driving on Sir John A and other streets. There's also a heritage designation area at 4 of these locations: the prison for women, the Kingston Penitentiary, on the provincial campus, and as well, there's a heritage designation area that the strategy has identified. So the question, all of this is a long way to ask a question, and that is, are there plans to do a secondary plan for this area? That it seems that there's now several a momentum of change happening in this district. From a lot of it will be entering the private sector domain for the very first time. It has always been as a public land and under public management, not under municipal jurisdiction even. So what plans are there to look at what all of this change will represent in terms of the next steps? Thank you.
Hi, Bruce, and thank you for those questions. At this time, the city does not have any plans for a future secondary plan for this area. There was a secondary planning exercise that was completed for the Kingston Provincial Campus a few years ago. I believe it was 2017. And then through the work being done for the Central Kingston Growth Strategy, which only looks at the residentially designated areas. The intent is to create specific policies to enable those intensification areas. However, your point is well taken, and I can certainly take back this comment and have an internal discussion with my colleagues.
Okay, we're seeing no additional questions via the raised hands or the Q&A. Oh, never mind. Okay, Roger, go right ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Hello, my name is Roger Healy, and I just have a sort of a broad question here about all of the policies that are being discussed that are connected to this, and I'm talking at a very broad area, like you mentioned the population growth studies but I'm wondering, there were there 2 or 3 that I thought were not mentioned. One of them was the waterfront master plan, for example. The Kingston Transportation Master Plan of 2015, which should be reviewed any day now. I would think it was supposed to be every 5 years, and it hasn't been reviewed yet. The Active Transportation Master Plan, which was completed in 2018, and the Household Travel Survey, which really does provide some interesting information about travel requirements and needs within the areas that we're discussing. So I just want to ask, to what extent are all of those studies considered in this in this study, in this particular growth study.
Thanks for those comments and questions, Roger. So with respect to the studies that you mentioned, the Waterfront Master Plan, KTMP, the Active Transportation Master Plan, and the Population Growth Study. So those will all be considered when we update our official plan in 2023. So when we started the Central Kingston Growth Strategy, like the scope of this project wasn't as broad. We did take the population projection study that was completed in 2019. We did take that into consideration. However, like all of these other studies that you mentioned, they will really come together when we update our official plan. The other thing I wanted to mention was that the previous population study that was prepared was based on the 2016 census. And with the new census completed this year, we will be looking to update the population projection study. It'll likely be next year or the following year, because that will be one of the background studies that we will need to complete for our official plan update in 2023. And also at that time, my understanding is that transportation services would also be looking at updating the Kingston Transportation Master Plan at that time.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and again, seeing that there are no additional questions, what we can do is we'll just leave it open for another minute or two in case someone is just collecting their thoughts or jotting something down right now. Otherwise, seeing that, we'll be on track to conclude a few minutes early and can move into the next steps. So what I'll do is I'll just wait for 2 minutes, give everyone an opportunity to see if there are some additional questions or comments, and move things along after that. Thanks. AG, we've got another question here. You can go right ahead.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question as to the corridors on Johnson and Brock. I understand that they're primarily chosen for the transit use. It's great to hear. That area that's directly north of the Queens Main campus and south of Johnson Street, which is predominantly single-family homes that have seen a reduced amount of property standards and a lot of activity around them. Is there a reason why they have not been considered for high-density residential?
Thanks, AJ, for that question. So as I mentioned, we will be reviewing the broader area for intensification as part of the official plan update exercise in 2023. A lot of that area is what's called the campus expansion area within the city's official plan. So the official plan policies basically indicate that any future intensification within that area will need to be further reviewed. The other thing was that Queen's University had included that portion within their campus master plan. So there are a few things here that we would need to consider going forward. So like I said, there's definitely the sewer separation piece that we would need to review alongside Utilities Kingston, and also the market feasibility piece. And then there was one segment on one side of Johnson that we had left out specifically just because for us to be able to propose an appropriate build form, we thought that we couldn't do that without completing a market analysis study for that area.
Thanks, Kriti. Appreciate the update.
Thanks.
All right, and again, seeing no additional questions, we'll give it a couple seconds here. Give it about a minute before moving along to conclude. So seeing no additional questions, we can wrap things up. Again, at any point in time, if you do have a follow-up question, please don't hesitate to reach out to the project team, and we can try and get you the answers that you're looking for. All right, so with that in mind, thank you to everyone for joining us and for participating and sharing your questions with the project team. It's been great to hear from everyone about this project and to be able to share some updates and some information for you. We're going to launch just a really quick evaluation poll right here. And essentially, it's just a few questions about the general public engagement. And we'd encourage all of you to take a second and just complete the poll before logging off. Just so you're also aware, the reporting out for this project will be sent out to the project group as well and posted on the Get Involved page for this project, the Central Kingston Growth Strategy Get Involved page. And so having said that, I'd like to thank everyone once again for joining us. I'm going to leave the poll open, but in the meantime, thank you for coming out and feel free to log out.